The room was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of silence, it was the heavy, suffocating kind that makes every breath feel forced. The young man sat hunched over his desk, the dim yellow bulb above him flickering as if even the light was exhausted from watching him fail. Crumpled papers covered the floor like fallen leaves from a dying tree. He had tried again and again, each attempt ending the same way, in frustration, disappointment, and the feeling that maybe excellence wasn't something meant for him. He ran his fingers through his hair, breathing heavily, staring at the latest ruined page. His hand had slipped again, ruining the small progress he'd made. It shouldn't have mattered, mistakes happen. But tonight, it felt personal. It felt like the universe was reminding him of every shortcoming, every flaw, every moment he'd fallen short. A cold wave washed through him, the fear that he would never be exceptional at anything. That he was destined for mediocrity. He closed his eyes, leaning back, and the room seemed to grow darker. The air felt heavier. It was as if the shadows in the corners had started to thicken, pulling the light inward. Then, in the farthest corner of the room, something shifted. He didn't hear it with his ears, he felt it, like a presence pressing gently into his awareness. His eyes opened slowly, hesitant, unsure if fatigue was playing tricks on him. But the shadow wasn't a trick. A figure stood there, tall, composed, wrapped in the calm authority of someone who had faced storms far greater than frustration. The young man froze. The figure stepped forward, and the yellow light revealed the details of traditional samurai armor, worn yet dignified, as if every scratch carried a story. The room did not change, yet everything felt different. Time felt slower. The air felt clearer. The samurai did not speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone held a weight that words could never carry. His eyes, steady, unblinking, fell on the scattered papers around the young man's feet. And somehow, in that silent exchange, the young man understood exactly what the samurai was seeing, not failure, but a battlefield. Not a mess, but evidence of effort. The samurai's gaze was not disappointed. It was patient, observant, understanding. The young man lowered his eyes, feeling shame wash over him. What would a warrior, someone trained in discipline, honor, and mastery, think of his endless frustration over something so small? But when he looked up again, the samurai's posture remained unchanged, unjudging, steady like a mountain. He reached slowly to his side and rested a hand on the hilt of his katana, not drawing it, not threatening, but showing its presence. The gesture was deliberate, controlled, meaningful. And suddenly, the young man understood the lesson being given without a single word spoken. Mastery was not a gift. It was not something a person stumbled into. It was the product of discipline, patience, and the willingness to endure countless failures without surrendering to them. The samurai's silent stance was a reminder that every master had once stood where he stood now, surrounded by their own flawed attempts, questioning their own abilities, tempted to give up. But they didn't. They persevered. The samurai's steady gaze pierced deeper into him, as if to say, "Your struggle is not a sign of weakness. It is the path." The young man's breath steadied. He looked around once more at the chaos in the room, but it no longer felt like a symbol of failure. It felt like the first steps of someone who had not yet learned how to practice, how to focus, how to commit fully. The weight on his chest began to lift, replaced by something quieter, steadier, resolve. When he looked back at the samurai, the figure remained still, calm, and unwavering. A silent guardian of discipline. A reminder of what he could become. And in that moment, the young man realized something powerful. Excellence wasn't waiting at the end of the path, it began right here, in the struggle itself. The room around him slowly faded, as if the world itself was pulling him into another reality. The dim walls dissolved into shadow, and when the darkness settled, he found himself standing in the center of a quiet dojo. The air was still, heavy with the scent of old wood and memories of countless warriors who had once practiced here. A single row of candles lined the back wall, their flames barely flickering, steady like disciplined breaths. At the center of the dojo, the samurai knelt in silence. There was no audience, no noise, no rush, only deliberate calm. The young man watched as the warrior rested his hands on his thighs, spine straight, gaze forward with unwavering focus. Every part of his posture radiated purpose. The silence wasn't empty, it was alive, filled with a deep awareness that made the young man feel the weight of every breath. Slowly, the samurai lifted one hand, placing his fingertips on the handle of the katana at his side. The movement was so controlled that it almost seemed unreal, as if time itself had slowed to honor the ritual. He didn't draw the sword immediately. He paused, letting his breath settle, letting the young man feel the gravity of patience. It became clear that nothing the samurai did was wasted. There were no unnecessary gestures. No hurried motions. No carelessness. Everything mattered. Then, with breathtaking precision, the samurai drew the blade. The steel whispered softly against the sheath, not with force, but with respect. The blade caught the candlelight, not shining brightly, but glowing with a muted intensity, as if it held centuries of discipline within its metal. The young man stood mesmerized as the samurai raised the sword with both hands, holding it before him with perfect alignment. His arms did not tremble. His grip did not falter. It was the posture of someone who had performed this movement thousands of times, each repetition sharpening not only skill, but spirit. The samurai inhaled slowly, and as he exhaled, he began to move. Every motion was deliberate, controlled, and impossibly smooth. The blade cut through the air with silent precision, not displaying strength but balance. The young man noticed how carefully the warrior placed each foot, how his weight shifted with intention, how even his smallest movements were filled with purpose. There was no trace of frustration, no sign of doubt or hesitation. This was practice, but practice done with a reverence that elevated it above routine. It wasn't the sword that made the samurai powerful. It was the discipline behind the sword. The young man's breath hitched as realization washed over him. He had always approached his craft with impatience, expecting improvement without honoring the process. He rushed. He grew frustrated. He gave up too easily. But the samurai showed him something deeper. Mastery is not achieved through force or speed. It is earned through deliberate repetition, where the mind, body, and spirit unite behind each small action. He watched as the samurai repeated the sequence again, slower this time, even more controlled. The blade traced a path through the air that seemed almost spiritual. This was not performance. This was devotion. The samurai wasn't practicing for perfection. He was practicing to refine the person holding the sword. The young man felt the weight of that lesson settling into him like a stone sinking gently into still water. It wasn't about doing the task. It was about becoming someone capable of doing it well. As the final movement ended, the samurai lowered the blade and returned it to its sheath with the same quiet precision. The dojo seemed to exhale with him. No words were spoken, yet the message echoed through the young man's mind like a bell ringing in the distance. Focus on the process. Honor the repetition. Mastery lives in the details. The samurai slowly lifted his gaze and looked directly at the young man. There was no judgment in his eyes, only expectation. The kind of expectation that said, "Now you understand. What you do next defines you." And as the candlelight flickered, the dojo dissolved back into darkness, leaving the young man standing with a newfound clarity, ready to approach his own craft with the same deliberate precision he had just witnessed. The third test began at dawn, when the mountain air felt thin enough to cut. Hiro was told to meet Master Renji at the eastern ridge, a place where the wind howled fiercely and the ground sloped sharply downward into a valley. When he arrived, the master was already there, standing silently, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his wooden practice sword. There were no instructions, no explanation, only the heavy silence that seemed to press on Hiro's chest. Then, without warning, Renji attacked. The strike wasn't meant to wound, but the speed was real, sharp enough to force Hiro into immediate defense. Hiro blocked, stumbled back 2 steps, and regained his balance. Before he could take a breath, another strike came, then another, flowing from Renji like water pouring from a cracked dam. Hiro could barely keep up. Each blow felt like a question, a challenge, a demand that he reveal the truth of his training. His arms trembled from the force, his breath staggered, sweat ran down his temples despite the cold. But the real difficulty wasn't the speed, it was the unpredictability. Renji was not repeating patterns. There was no rhythm to memorize, no strategy to lean on. Every move came from a place of total presence, and Hiro realized he was being pushed into something beyond technique. After several minutes, he felt frustration rise. He wanted to anticipate the next move, wanted to regain control, wanted to prove he was improving. Instead, he was failing, slipping, getting slower. His mind spiraled into doubt. Why couldn't he keep up? Why wasn't he better? Why did everything feel like it was collapsing? Renji stopped suddenly. Hiro stood breathless, sword hanging weakly in his grip. For a long moment, the master simply watched him. Then he struck again, this time with a single, slow motion. Hiro raised his sword too late. The wooden blade tapped the center of his forehead, gentle but undeniable. "You lost," Renji said quietly, not because your body is weak, but because your mind left the moment. Hiro lowered his eyes. The sting wasn't physical, it was the truth piercing through his frustration. Renji stepped back and motioned for him to follow. They walked to the cliff's edge, where the valley stretched wide below them. The wind roared, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant smoke. Look at the mountains, Renji said. Did they rush? Did they plan their next move? Did they argue with the wind about its direction? Hiro shook his head. Mastery, Renji continued, is not the ability to force the world into your rhythm. It is the ability to meet each moment exactly as it arrives, without fear, without hesitation, without the noise of your own expectations. Hiro listened, feeling the words echo inside him. Renji placed his wooden sword on the ground between them. When you fought me, you were not fighting me, he said. You were fighting your desire to succeed. You were fighting the thought of failure. You were fighting your doubts. A samurai learns to do one thing exceptionally well, to be wholly present. Hiro closed his eyes and let the wind wash over him. He felt his breath slow, his mind steady, the scattered pieces of his thoughts settling into a quiet clarity. When he opened them again, Renji nodded as if sensing the change. Good, the master said. Now pick up your sword. We begin again. And for the first time, Hiro felt ready, not to win, but to truly see, to move with the moment instead of against it. The path to mastery was no longer a distant concept, it was right here, in every breath, every step, every strike yet to come.